Myths of the Machine is brought to you by our sponsor, Mighty Man Limited. Be a master of the universe when you wear Mighty Man Limited athletic and sportswear, custom-designed athletic compression gear for male and female athletes, compression shirts, sports bras, yoga pants, hoodies, and more. Available only at mightyman.logosoftware.com. Be mighty. Since the time when men gathered around campfires and told tales of the warriors who challenged the monsters that gather in the dark. The mighty men who fought alongside the gods, some rising to victory, others falling into the abyss. These are the heroes who became the myths of the machine.
I said, "Why are you holding my axe?" The Redbeard Giant shouted at Jacob and the boy who was holding his axe. The bald Barbarian, who just fell from the sky creating a crater in the Bronx's Pelham Bay Park, reached out for the bearded axe held by the lad, when Jacob's own hand reached out, grabbing the Barbarian's leather gauntleted wrist.
"This would not be a good idea for you to do this, sir,"
said Jacob, matter of fact. The bearded giant looked at his own arm, now arrested by the shabbily dressed man's grubby mitt, and at the same time he thought to himself, few of his kinsmen could achieve such a feat. He turned away from the man just slightly and swung his free left hand, now clenched into a massive fist, across his own body and into the exposed chin of the man called Jacob Matthews. Jacob saw a bright light and felt himself lift off the ground as if he were taking flight like a bird, and then only blackness. The shabby man was indeed lifted off his feet, hurtling 10 yards before crashing into a thicket of bushes and trees, which shattered and splintered as they attenuated his return to solid ground. The giant looked, stunned, at his own wrist that had been in the grip of the overcoat-wearing oaf. He grimaced as if it had failed him by being caught and prevented momentarily from reacquiring his ancient battle-axe, now held by the young boy.
"Boy! Give me that!"
he shouted at the lad, frozen to the spot. The boy looked at the axe that he had just found in the oak tree, then at the bald, red-bearded giant, and then at the crater he had just crawled from after impacting the earth from who knew how high or where. He looked at the unconscious man sprawled in the grove of smashed trees and Parks Department fencing. The boy shouted, "No!" and ran deeper into the woods of the urban forest.
"Vos ascendente canum, aquum prapta ium, ascendente!"
Latin. Jacob felt the sting of the whip bite into his shoulder.
"Get up, you dog! I said no water for him!"
The whistling whip snapped to its terminus across Jacob's other side.
"Get up!"
Jacob could feel the trickle of blood from where the lash of the whip had torn his skin. Through the pain, he looked at the young woman who gave water to the fallen man. She was now wiping his face clean of the blood and sand caked upon it after the brutal scourging he had just endured. Even as she wiped the old blood from his face, the thorns forced down onto his brow drew fresh blood from every contact with the beaten man's flesh. She worked as quickly as she could, providing aid to the condemned man. The Romans and the people of Jerusalem would have their blood. She was grateful the large stranger protected her from the Roman whips, but she held no illusion. He could abandon her to the legionnaires' lashing as quickly as he had intervened. The whip whistled a third time, catching Jacob around his neck. Again, the tanned leather ripped into his skin, sending rivulets of blood down his body. Enduring the lash was one thing. Being deprived of precious oxygen, though, drove the curly-haired man to his knees, where he now collapsed to the soon-to-be-crucified man's side. He pulled at the garrote, constricting his airways, his balled fists pushing into the bloody sand, desperately attempting to maintain his balance and grip on consciousness. He was slowly losing his battle.
"Your faithful subjects still kneel at your side, O great king!"
a legionnaire mocked the bloody prisoner. The battered man, his blood seeping through the prison toga, lifted his head to see the man at his side, being choked by the Roman leather, only for protecting a woman he didn't even know, a woman who was kind enough to give this man water. Jacob gasped for air, his tanned face darkening with constricted blood, his eyes blurring with the pressure building inside them, while under the hot desert sun. Jacob never unclenched his fist until the condemned prisoner touched it with his own bloodied and broken hand, the blood of both men becoming a viscous bond between them. Jacob felt the burning fire through his body as the sun beat down on his vaso-congested face. He presumed this was what his death no doubt felt like, as the fire burned through his body and filled his mind's eye with a golden light. Jacob thought he had heard the word, enough.
Basta! Leave him. Take the prisoner. You! Carry his crucifix.
As the Roman whip was untangled from Jacob's throat, legionnaires pulled the thorn-crowned man to his feet, his bloody hand sliding from Jacob's own. Jacob's eyes met those of the man who held his hand but a moment before, and he saw him mouth something. Get up. Jacob's eyes stared into the ball of hot desert sun glaring above him as his eyes closed. When he opened them again, the sun stared back at him still, as it was setting behind the Parkview condominium on the west side of I-95. Jacob tried to move, only to feel sharp stinging pain, the snapped branches piercing his back and side where he was impaled by several broken tree limbs. Jacob painfully rolled to his side, snapping the branches that held him to the park, like a butterfly pinned to a museum display. His wounds would leave a normal man in jeopardy of his life, but Jacob simply pulled the branches through the flesh where they had gored him, and while his clothing remained torn and bloody, his wounds miraculously began to close up and heal almost instantly. As his body underwent the amazing recovery, Jacob ran over to his Big Apple pea cap, laying on the ground. He shook it clean of dust and pulled it tightly to his head, then ran off after the clean-painted giant with the red beard and the boy who was holding his axe. The path was easy to find and follow. The boy ran towards the waterfront. The giant barbarian left a trail of smashed and broken trees, indicate his single-minded intention of retrieving his weapon. As Jacob made his way through the thick woods of damaged trees, he could hear the boy shouting for somebody to help him. Jacob increased his pace until he came to a clearing, 100 yards from where the lone wall of the 100-year-old Bronx Beach Club once stood alongside the many private resort clubs that once dotted the now unkempt and wild waterfront. The boy, his back to the old red bricks, held the axe with two hands in front of him, as if to ward off the giant barbarian.
Get away! Shouted the boy. Leave me alone!
The giant again reached for the handle of the bearded axe.
I am the son of Rod. Nothing will stop my hand.
Jacob knew he couldn't clear the distance between them in time to stop the giant with force.
Young man, put down the axe. Throw it to the ground. Just give it to him.
Jacob shouted, desperate that the boy comply.
No! Get back! I found it! It's mine!
The red-bearded giant grabbed the axe handle, his giant hand enveloping the boy's hands in his grip.
No!
Shouted Jacob, seemingly in more pain than when he was battered across the park and impaled on broken tree limbs. His hands stretched out, but he was not that fantastic that they would distort themselves and cover the distance needed by will alone. Jacob had spent many years working to assure that type of cosmic event would not radiate on his world. The darkening skies tore open as a huge thunderbolt traveled the distance from the heaven to the earth in less than a heartbeat. The massive discharge of energy occulted the boy and the giant as if reclaiming them both from whence the giant had just arrived. Jacob had seen many amazing things even since before that sad Passover day when he took the Roman's lash to protect the kindly water girl. Jacob had seen what he had believed to be the subtle works of God and the brash efforts of man, and those not quite God or man, to duplicate them. But this awesome display, with the workings of hands, even the long-lived Jacob had only read about in books ancient when he was still young. This was a power that unleashed could destroy cities that mankind would never find trace. But at the center of the strike, where the boy and the red-haired giant once stood, was now a lone figure in the smoke and flying debris. Jacob walked closer to the figure, who was still hidden by the airborne detritus. Closer still, Jacob saw the figure was neither the young boy nor the bald red-bearded giant, but a third individual he had not as of yet seen. Replacing the two, who Jacob trailed into the woods, was a man who stood as tall and as wide as the giant, but his bald pate was covered in long red hair, braided at either temple. He was youthful, but not so young as the boy to not wear a full beard. The ancient raiments of the Barbarian Giant now replaced with a modern-day black, silver, and bronze armor that would make the top Hollywood designers jealous in their concept and application. The new figure looked himself over with a surprised scrutiny similar to Jacob's own. The red-haired warrior approvingly nodded at what he saw. He looked at the tooled belt and checked its tautness. He twisted and turned his now metal-gloved hand, still holding the unchanged bearded axe. He felt its heft in its hand. This new giant looked at Jacob with eyes green and brimming with arcane power and said,
Cool!